Okay.
Yes, good evening, good morning, and good day wherever you are. Welcome to Kumbukeni, and as excuse me, and as Brother Milton Alimadi always says, the Open University, the largest open university in the World Forum. My name is Adesoji Ginla. I am reaching you from London, the heart of empire, the mother of all, imperialists.
Not my mother, but go on.
Teaching everyone how to, toe the line, as it were. And with me, as usual, is my co-host, Unduku, and Brother Milton. So, ladies and gentlemen, please introduce yourselves.
Habari gani, karibuni, asanteni, kwa kuwa nasi. The name is Nduku, a co-host like Adesoji just introduced on Kumbukeni, an African woman who has decided finally that we need to take matters into our own hands and tujichagulie. So we tell our story from our own perspective, and we counter the false narrative that the West has told on Africa and Africans for centuries. So this is the work we're doing, and thank you all for supporting us to do it.
Yes, comrades, karibuni from wherever you're tuning in today to our open weekly university, Kumbukeni, Milton Alimadi, here in the United States, the last remaining and declining Western empire. And of course, the natives are not being told what is really happening. And you can only understand it by joining conversations such as the one we have on Kumbukeni. Karibuni, welcome.
So yes, as people might be aware or not so, and depending on where you are in the world, the stone decided to move, and it's a play on an African proverb made popular by Chinua Achebe in his book Man of the People, where he says one should not be the stone that things happen to, or try as much as possible to move. So in so doing, South Africa did move. On Thursday, they laid out the case at The Hague for reprieve for the people of Palestine. Why is that so? I suppose strength can be drawn from the fact that Samora Michel's popular quote is, international solidarity is not an act of charity, it's an act of unity between allies fighting on different terrains towards the same objective. The foremost of these objectives is to aid the development of humanity to the highest level possible. That's Chairman Samora Machel. Now, why is what South Africa did unique or possible? It's unique in the sense that we're often told that we operate in an international framework. That international framework has, since October 7, looked the other way, while over 27,000 people have literally been slaughtered on the international watch. While everyone was pussyfooting around the problem, South Africa decided, you know what, someone has to speak up, and speak up they did. So we're here talking about the importance of said case. Does that set a precedent? And what does it mean for the international community going forward? So over to you, sister.
I forgot I was on mute. What does it mean for the international community? Let me just say, before I even say what it means, the UN has lost its credibility for many reasons. One of them being that every time a decision is made, those nations that we know of, right, the bully nations, the United States, Israel, clearly do not heed whatever is agreed upon on those agreements. So let's just start by saying that. But what this means for South Africa is, again, kujichagulia. They are finally deciding what terms they're going to work by, and deciding that they're not going to be scared of those bullies' sanctions or the repercussions that usually come to the nations who stand up against them. As I was listening to the conventions at the UN, the presentations by the different lawyers from South Africa, the case is very clear. And for South Africa, I am glad at the strategy that they used, the legal strategy to present this. The arguments that they presented were very clear. The videos that they showed were very clear. We shared the link here for those of you who want to watch it. It's a 3-hour video. You can watch it an hour a day or however, depending on your availability. But this, first of all, as a nation that has gone through apartheid, it serves them right to stand up and say, we identify something that is similar to what we've gone through, and we're saying no about it. We're standing against it. So yes, and also given the history of South Africa with Palestine, the first lawyer who presents at the UN starts by quoting Mandela, right? They're also representing that history. But yes, this is very, very good for Africa, and I hope more African countries. As I was going through the research for this, I was thinking of the Haiti, the Kenyan deployment to Haiti. And I was thinking, the right thing to do as far as deploying as an African nation is to deploy troops, all 54 states, to Palestine to fight the Israelis. So yes, this is a good move for Africa.
Brother Milton?
Yes, yes. Okay, so regardless of the outcome of the how the judges vote at the ICJ, I think South Africa has already scored several victories diplomatically. I think just filing this lawsuit alone has changed the conversation, has taken it beyond just, is Hamas a terrorist organization? Did Hamas commit terrorism on October 6th? And is Israel justified in its reaction? So that had been the conversation, very narrow. So it was, oh, perhaps Israel is justified, but it's excessive in what it's been doing. So South Africa said, no, the history did not start on October 6th and 7th. Let's go back to 1948. So that is now in the conversation, and people are watching this all over the world. So now the conversation is being taken beyond the narrow terms that have been set by the BBC, the CNN, the New York Times, and all the other usual suspects, the corporate media. So that to me is a great victory. It changes the terms of the discussion. And that, of course, is very important because South Africa is saying, you can't just keep saying Hamas is a terrorist organization and that's the end of the conversation. Why does Hamas exist in the first place, right? So let's look at all acts of violence that go back historically that have been committed against the people of Palestine, including the dispossession and the displacement, you see? So that affects people's thinking as well, because you can't think about what you are not taught, what you don't know about, what is not brought up in media. So I think that was very important, number one. Number two, going forward, even if Israel continues to be defiant, and that would not be shocking given the type of prime minister they have right now, Netanyahu. I think obviously the European countries care more about the importance of institutions than the United States. So they're less arrogant than the United States. So they don't want US arrogance, Israeli arrogance to completely undermine this United Nations institution. They take the UN much more seriously than the US because they remember why the UN was created in the first place. And these institutions, their countries were completely destroyed by Hitler. Yes, of course, the US also bore the cost by deploying so many soldiers and many lives were lost, but the US did not experience the kind of destruction that the Europeans did. So they have a lot more respect for these organizations. So that is also another victory for what South Africa has done. And also, finally, in terms of what Sister Nduku said, I agree. It also shows that African countries using institutions that exist, no matter flawed that these institutions are, so long as they still exist, there are occasions that you can also use it to your advantage, just like the US does all the time. In fact, the United Nations is very important. When the US wanted to go and destroy Gaddafi and his government in Libya, kept referring to that resolution again and again. And by the way, South Africa actually voted for that resolution. So this could be South Africa's way of also atoning for having supported that resolution that led to the destruction of Libya. And other African countries, they have not been able to use the implicit power of the state. A state may be a small state, but so long as you're a national entity, a recognized government with sovereignty, you can have some global impact. The problem is many of these countries are doing so many terrible things domestically. They're not even focusing on how can we use the existence of the state to have global impact. So this is one example where South Africa showed that it can be done. I hope South Africa now that it has more elevated stature, not only in the world, but particularly in Africa as well, can now push the conversation for Africa integration and African unity. Don't let that momentum go to waste. Those are my initial observations.
Mm.
Okay. You want to say something, Sister?
No.
Okay. On your last point, on that very last point, which is using the institution of states, one key thing there is that is often hidden from the world view is that Africa too experiences a lot of class struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So when Nkrumah wrote his book in 1965 on the class struggle within Africa, the neocolonial who are doing the bidding of the West,
Yep.
what he laid out in that book very, very succinctly is the fact that you have a class that is only there and only there for one reason, which is to champion the cause of the imperialist.
Yep.
Now, in the case of South Africa, where the difference comes in is the fact that you have a very recent history that acts as a motivator. The fact that apartheid was just dismantled in South Africa. So, question would be, was that the only motivator to South Africa for bringing the case? And if so, what do you envisage to be the overall picture with regards to what the intent is?
I mean, they laid out their intent in their presentations, right, at the hearing. But for any human being who exists today, our intent is to shut down Israel, right? For any human being who exists today, our intent is to stop the deaths of Palestinians that are just, it's as if they're playing a video game and they don't see the lives of the people. So I would hope, and I think that that's their intent, the morality of it all, the humanity of it all, the fact that Israel is being a bully behind Semitism and the Holocaust and them being victims of the Holocaust and getting away with atrocities, and the US right behind them. And I hope, and I think I saw something saying that South Africa is moving to include the US in this complaint, should be held accountable, because they are providing without the support of the United States, Israel is not going to be able to attack Palestine to the extent that it's doing right now. So I hope their motivation was humanity, saving humanity and stopping the deaths, which is what they said. What they're asking for in the provisions is a stop to the killing and a stop to the mental harm that is being carried out currently, and they want to stop further like severe future harm that could result from this that is not going to be stoppable. So I hope that's it.
Brother
Okay,
Milton?
so in terms of drawing the comparison, yeah, in fact, the foreign minister, Naledi Pandor, actually did mention their own history of apartheid in South Africa and apartheid that the Palestinians have been experiencing in terms of the siege of the Gaza Strip, in terms of the apartheid in the West Bank, where there's some streets that Palestinians cannot even walk on
Yep.
or drive on. You know, it does not get any more explicit than that. That is what apartheid was all about. You know, ethnic and racial reservation of certain areas. And so that South Africa can relate to that much more than any other country, perhaps. Of course, the US should also, since we had apartheid, particularly in the South of the United States as well. And she mentioned that, she said, and she was responding to a question from a European South African member of parliament who had sort of challenged her that, and she said, by supporting justice for the Palestinians, it does not mean that we're supporting terrorism. And we don't believe in retribution. And she gave the story of her grandfather who worked all his life. You know, he's a laborer and saved money throughout his life. And at the twilight of his life, toward the end of his life, he had saved enough to buy a home. And he bought a house, a little bit of land. And then the apartheid regime came and said, this area is reserved only for white people. And the grandfather and other Africans were kicked out of that place without compensation, not a single dollar in compensation. Said, do I feel the pain? Of course. Do I seek retribution? No, because I want us to work toward building a new South Africa. And that is the kind of conduct that she wants to see in Palestine as well. So I think that was very powerful to her, and that answers your question. So the answer, of course, is absolutely yes. But then, of course, South Africa also remembers that they have a long history of supporting the Palestinian struggle. And the Palestinians also had a long history of supporting the South African struggle against apartheid, particularly during the era of Yasser Arafat and the PLO. In the PLO, South Africa, of course, was still under apartheid, but the PLO had diplomatic representation in pretty much every African country. They had like an embassy, right? So I think South Africa is also trying to revive that history of solidarity, because now we live in a place where, because many of these African leaders have not been able to liberate Africa's economy from the control of the West. Now they're so dependent. Israel has been spreading its financial resources, which of course are US resources, right, to these African countries in order to sort of neuter them, you know, stop them with identifying with the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian struggle. So I think by doing this, South Africa may also be able to, you know, say, listen, wait a minute, don't forget our history, fellow African countries, wake up. Let's stand with the Palestinians. They have a just cause. And then, of course, they also remember the history of the collaboration between Israel and the apartheid state, you know, in helping to build up the military of the apartheid regime. They used to have joint military exercises. They used to exchange technology. Israel also helped them with their nuclear weapons capability technology. So I think not all of that is lost on the leadership of the African national government in South Africa.
Okay. I will also add that in bringing the case, as I was listening to a couple of
well, I'm sorry, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to mention this too. Obviously, all of us, as Sister Nduku said, who have been watching this bombardment, the killing of civilians, the killing of women, the killing of children, the bombing of churches, the bombing of mosques, the bombing of schools. There's reported execution of people who had already been surrendered and had been taken prisoner. The digging up of graves of people that had already been buried. You know, we feel that sense of complete, as human beings, as Sister Nduku said, as human beings, we feel it. So the outrage and pain we've been feeling, and then finally to see some country doing something about it. So I think that also is worth mentioning.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
One of the South African lawyers, I forget how many exactly, but it was more than hundreds per day, bombs being dropped. Like, it's the fact that it was a little irritating for me, honestly. The legal system as it is irritating to me, because you have something that is evident, we can all see it, but now we're in a room wearing these outfits, now trying to figure out what happened. Did it happen? But we all saw it on camera. If you're dropping hundreds of bombs a day,
and not just regular bombs, bombs that are designed to
2,000 pounds
to break bunker. You know what a bunker is, right? A bunker is supposed to be a secure place where if you have a military command, all the generals go inside a bunker to be safe.
2,000.
You have the leadership of our country, the top politicians, and the government would be protected in a bunker. So they have bombs that are designed to disrupt this bunker. So how can this be any element of legitimate defense?
Speaking of defense, one of the news commentaries was talking about how, if Israel is indicted, how will the United States defend itself? Because by being the enabler and diplomatic enforcer, you're effectively complicit in this crime. And so once that is brought against against Israel, there is no place for US to hide. I was like, yes, strategy.
Yeah.
Understanding, sometimes you don't really have to go against the lion. Go and grab the lioness. The lion will come running. And then you can, set a beautiful trap for the main one you want. Because if you build a framework, a framework of legal parameters of how everyone should act within the international community, and for years you've basically allowed one party to get away with it because of, again, the framework of 5 permanent members each with a veto vote that can then override everything else. If this case is, found against Israel, what that means is Israel goes away from being, quote unquote, the civilized country in the Middle East to being not just a pariah state, but also a state now that everybody will want to avoid. And isolation, I think, is the problem Israel is trying to avoid. So can you guys speak to the issue of what isolation might mean for Israel going forward?
I hope they get it. They've had it coming. It is due. The karma needs to put on her suit and straight up head to Israel like yesterday. I truly hope they get it. I had other thoughts that I cannot share on live TV about what Israel should get. But you do not get away with doing what you're doing right now and think that you can talk about your Holocaust and your need for a land and have sympathy or empathy from me or anyone else with a decent head on their shoulders. I hope they get it. This should be the fall of these empires because they have done nothing but oppress people for years. And I hope the United States gets it in conjunction with this. There's a video I shared also of the former US Ambassador Charles Freeman sharing about his thoughts about this whole situation. And he said the United States has sealed its fate by associating itself in this way with Israel. And it's no longer going to be the power that it always intended to be after this. And Israel has sealed its fate. Israel will no longer be remembered as the victim of a Holocaust, as a refugee state for people who suffered a genocide themselves. It will be remembered as an actor of genocide. It will be remembered for the deaths of newborn babies. It will be remembered for all the videos that we are all seeing. That is what we will all remember Israel and the United States by default, because they're the ones providing those weapons. So I hope it's coming, and it cannot come sooner for me.
Okay, so it will definitely have impact, because if the court rules in favor of South Africa's lawsuit that indeed Israel is committing genocide against the people of Gaza, against the Palestinians, the US, of course, arrogantly can just ignore it, just like it ignored the 1986 decision when the same court found in favor of Nicaragua, when the US had been supporting, financing the Contras, killed so many people, destroyed infrastructure. They even laid mines, bombs in the port in Managua. And the court found the US guilty and liable and assessed damages. And the US simply ignored it. And when the Nicaraguan government went to the Security Council to try to get that sanctions, the reparations enforced, the US, of course, vetoed it, since it has the power in the Security Council. But the European countries, as I said earlier, take the institution a little more seriously. So some of them may, in fact, impose economic sanctions and punishment as a result of this decision. And in terms of the US imperialism and using Israel as its beachhead in the region, I think that definitely, I agree with Sister Nduku, is going to backfire. In fact, Israel and Netanyahu's government has done much, much more harm to Israel's security than Hamas has with this onslaught. Because now, you talk about isolation. There's so many countries that had watched, and initially, even the ones that were horrified by what Hamas had done, killing 1,200 people, many of them civilians, children, they saw that. They were horrified. But now you come back with something that is multiple times much more horrific, and you're saying you're trying to justify this. So even those who had initially been a little sympathetic are now outraged by the impunity, by ignoring all these calls for sanctions, by blocking even water, blocking medicine, blocking food. How can this intent not be genocidal if you are depriving people of sustenance? Every human being needs food to survive. Now, the other point also is that by bringing the US into this action and saying, if it were not for US financial and military support, you would not be able to do this. Of course, that's entirely 100% correct. It's now going to open up other conversations. Look at what the US did to Congo, playing a role in the assassination of a legitimately elected prime minister, his brutal murder, destroying his government, destroying the country in terms of what followed in Congo, overthrowing Ghana and Ghana's Nkrumah in 1966, causing so much destruction in Angola and Mozambique, just because you are opposed to their socialist governments. All these can now be reopened up, and the cost and the liability and perhaps even reparations for that. That is why this lawsuit is potentially much more explosive than it currently seems.
And just to add quickly to what Ali Mahdi just said, another thing too, the fact that you tell Palestinians there's a safe zone, go there, and you bomb that safe zone.
Absolutely.
Like, just that by itself, case closed for me.
Right.
You literally, and it reminded me of their own Holocaust, where they were led into trains with this
Right.
story of going somewhere else, and they were
Not told
killed.
where they were going, but being taken to annihilation. Absolutely. And beyond even that, actually saying, why don't you leave and go to Egypt? Or why don't you leave and go to Jordan?
Your own house.
Think about that. Can you imagine if somebody was saying that to Israelis? Why don't you leave and go to the United States? Why don't you leave and go to Europe? You know,
And,
think
and
about that. People would say that is racist,
Mm.
that ethnic cleansing, that is anti-Semitic, that is genocidal. But yet, that is exactly what you're saying. And this is being documented. It's not being said in secret. And then the ugly language that even ministers have been using, even the chief of defense forces of the Israeli military, dehumanizing Palestinians and saying they should be exterminated. So I think the intent is very clear, because intent is one of the most important aspects in proving genocide. What other intention can you have other than extermination?
Yeah, it's
based on what I just summarized as being said.
It makes me hopeful for the sake of humanity, hopeful for our future when I hear an American, for this former US ambassador, speak the way he did. So I'm like, okay, there's some decent human beings out there, right? All hope is not lost. But he asked a very sensible question: is the violence? So now I'm going back to the whole. And I will say, Netanyahu at one point once said that he hoped for a war that would provide an excuse for the final removal of all Palestinians from the land of Israel as claimed by Israel. Like, that by itself is an admission of your intent.
And he's the prime minister. He's not just one of the ministers.
Right?
He is the prime minister, the chief executive politician of the nation, and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces.
And I connect that statement with this statement by former US Ambassador Charles Freeman: is the violence of the slave owner the same as the violence of the slave trying to end that violence? So how are you going to turn around and criminalize Hamas or whoever else is standing up in Palestine to fight you when you are killing their people? Like, how do you even justify that? We are defending ourselves, you're killing us and blowing us up, and you have admitted on public television that your intent is to get us off this land.
Right. And also, to add to what you're saying, and this is the saddest part about it, there are many decent people who are so beholden to capital and the political system that they actually betray their own humanity. You cannot tell me that even the Republicans who are in the Senate or Congress, when they watch that daily bombardment and they see the corpses of the Palestinian children, that they don't feel that, right?
They don't
Or
watch
the Democratic politicians, that they don't feel that. But their number one consideration is that if I stand up and say, this is a genocide, this has to stop, ceasefire now, I will not be reelected.
True.
So for them to take their political careers, to have that trump the lives of tens of thousands of people, that really says that you've abandoned your humanity. No, for political considerations.
Yeah. I mean, Alimadi, we can just go ahead and make that claim because they have. But yes, that is clearly what it states. I was thinking, as you said, that the UN, as far as Nicaragua, they did not even, they vetoed the decision that was made then. So as I look at the veto power of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, it cannot be lost.
Right, absolutely. And I agree with you. South Africa should carry the momentum it has right now to insist on reforming the Security Council of the United Nations.
Yes.
So speaking of reparations and paid and unpaid, of course, and you mentioned Angola and Mozambique. And the
Yep.
curious question would be the country next to Angola, Namibia, also has a stake in this recent legal case. And by that, I mean the entrance of Germany on the side of Israel,
Yes.
saying what we witness is not genocide. I would be a bit flippant and say, yes, they should know, because they're the only one who has done it to both of them.
Right.
So they know what it is. And unfortunately, that leaves a very sour taste in one's mouth, because if you're the host to the Holocaust Museum and in Berlin, and you see that on a daily basis, and you can say with your unambiguity that what you witness is not, then what you really have not learned any lesson.
Well, and as you said, that one could be flippant. One can say, well, you guys really have experience, perhaps with it.
Really?
And perhaps this is not enough for you. You want it to be at least maybe 5 times more.
They didn't do the burning in the oven.
And then you'll say, okay, now this qualifies the genocide. So they're saying maybe it's not good enough. Do a
We
little
haven't
more.
met our standard of genocide yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But now there's one thing that also should give us some hope. Let's look at the current judges of the International Court of Justice. Joan Donoghue is American. She's the president. Kirill Gevorkian is a Russian. So that is the vice president. So I think that is a vote for South Africa, I think. Peter Tomka is Slovakia. I don't know where Slovakia is.
No, that's still Eastern leanings. There's still Eastern leanings.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I think
no?
that's possibly another vote for South Africa. Mohammed Bennouna, Morocco. Morocco is very funny.
My sides with the US.
Because Morocco wants to be a part of the EU and all that. So
no, and they're also the host to the US oldest military base on the African continent.
Abdul Kawi Ahmed, Somalia.
That one is tricky. Depends on what his politics are following.
The whole thing depends on what each individual's politics are.
No. In the sense that where they come from will determine how they vote.
Somalia?
Yeah, in terms of
they're supposed to be independent. Yeah. I think Somalia in the past has also been very pro-Palestinian cause.
Because across the river.
I'll put fence on the fence.
On Somalia?
Yeah. Zhu Hankin is China. I think China is going to vote for the South Africa.
China might not vote with South Africa. I'll tell you what. Yeah, but you continue. I'll tell you what.
Go ahead.
You all think China is Africa's.
Okay, so they might not vote with South Africa, because if they do so, that would also highlight their problems with what's it called?
Myanmar?
With the Uyghurs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Julia Sebutinde, Uganda.
Well, she's your countryman, so you might.
She's my country lady.
Is she a Museveni type Ugandan or a Bobby Wine type of Ugandan?
She's a respected judge.
What does that mean?
The good thing is that the salary, Museveni does not pay her salary.
Who respects her?
The legal community. And most of these lawyers are lawyers who have built reputation globally.
Okay.
And the paycheck comes, of course, from the UN. So maybe I'll put her on the fence, because I know Museveni, of course, wants to get the World Bank to start lending Uganda money again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure he's trying to sell her vote to Israel and the United States right now.
Mercy.
Bandari Dalvia from India.
We'll side with the US.
Because Modi is trying to get the good crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Lipton Robinson, Jamaica.
We'll side with the US.
We've now moved this situation and this is reality. I'm glad you're doing this, Alimadi, but we moved it from morality and humanity to now capitalism.
Yes, absolutely. Nawaf Salam, Lebanon.
We'll definitely vote with the Palestinians. That's a sure vote.
Iwasawa Yuji, Japan.
US.
By history,
That's
the alliance.
that's a slam dunk.
George Nolte, Germany.
Well, they've already presented their argument without even being asked. They've already said it's a baseless claim that South Africa has presented. So there's no way he would vote against his country. We already know what Germany's vote is.
Okay. Hillary Charlesworth, Australia.
US.
Might
Definitely.
as well
US.
take them with Germany.
US, UK. That's US, UK angle.
Leonardo Nama, Brazil. I think with Lula.
That one's
Brazil has been playing
Palestinian.
with the US league.
That's Palestinian. That's Palestinian.
Because of
Lula
okay.
will not. Lula will not.
So let's see what we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor. We have 2 on the fence. So that would be 7. So it's still very narrow. Still very narrow.
I'm going to take it back to what exactly do these institutions mean to us anymore? And why the hell do we keep following them like they have some legitimacy if this is the case?
Well, my point is that South Africa needs to continue that momentum it has right now. Now, South Africa has the global attention of media. There's a very interesting article in the New York Times, which to me shows the level of concern that the system is with what South Africa is doing. The article admitted that South Africa has managed to take the conversation away from it always being dictated by the United States and the West. So if the New York Times is admitting that, that to me is significant. But the New York Times, and this is something we're going to discuss when we resume our critique of corporate journalism workshop. The New York Times story quoted the leader of the South African Jewish organization, who is saying this is a betrayal. South Africa essentially is condoning terrorism by filing this lawsuit. This is the leader of the large Jewish organization in South Africa saying this. The New York Times was very disingenuous. Had I not read the article from The Guardian from last week, I would not see the deception pulled by the New York Times. The Guardian quoted a Jewish member of the ANC who is a former member of parliament as well.
Andrew
no, on the
Feinstein.
contrary, South Africa has now gained global stature by bringing this lawsuit. And by the way, and he mentioned the leader of the Jewish organization, said during apartheid, you were against the fight against the apartheid regime. So how are you being quoted as an authority on this matter? You are the one who actually betrayed the struggle against apartheid. So the New York Times article did not mention that, in fact, this organization had not been fighting against the apartheid regime. That's not disingenuous. And I myself would never have known had I not read that Guardian article. That is why multiple sources of information
is in court.
Always critical. And if anybody wanted any proof that the New York Times can indeed and has been malicious in several instances, this is another piece of evidence and proof for you.
But there's also a book that Ndugu Alimadi has written, Manufactured Hate, that you should all go get. That has the evidence. As Kaba Kamene says, I want to see the evidence. It has all the evidence to show exactly what he's saying to be true.
Yes, and that book may be difficult since my own publisher,
I know, right?
Is not selling it now. Once I get the right back, I'm going to buy the right back in a couple of weeks. I'll make sure the book is available. But
Alimadi is still working on getting his Kujichagulia back.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And the former member of the South African Parliament you were quoting is Andrew Feinstein.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
So if you Google Andrew Feinstein, he's on YouTube. He does pieces for Double Down News.
Okay, very good. Because here's the other thing, which is why I say it's malicious. Because now it's going to create potential enmity toward people who will wrongfully conclude that the ANC is being anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish, based on the quote from the leader of this organization, when in fact there were actually Jewish South Africans who were members of the
Of the
ANC
ANC, yeah.
and fought against apartheid and who disagree, because obviously the New York Times did not quote Mr. Feinstein, whom you just mentioned, in that same article, did not quote it. So that's why I say it's malicious. You know, it's not just done randomly. It's done with malicious intentions.
Yeah. But I'm glad you brought up the anti-Semitism thing. And I urge everyone, please, every time that is thrown in your face, laugh as hard as you can and destroy the power that that term has. Because
Bring up the evidence. The evidence is there. Just like the
not even
example
that,
I just
just
gave right
laugh
now.
as if you've
know?
lost your mind. Just laugh at the person who's calling you anti-Semitic. Because number one, Semites include also Palestinians. Like there's nowhere that says that Semites are only Jews. But also, how am I anti-Semitic when I say to you, this government, first of all, that is atheist or led by an atheist, does not have any affiliation to the religion. This government is doing harm to other human beings. How is that anti-Semitic? Like let's all stop going along with this nonsense.
It's a weapon, it's a trap used to silence and to muzzle people. Look at what has happened with the university presidents.
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up.
Who in their mind believes that the president of Harvard University, the former president now, President Gay, was anti-Semitic?
But I wish she fought also. I really wish she
think
fought.
About that. Yeah. Well, I actually I do too. But sometimes, when academics are very, very sensitive sometimes, they don't want to get into the, the physical tussle of politics, but that to me was tragic, because if you can do that at the premier institution in the country, it means you can do it at any other level. Nothing is safe. So I think this is a moment of reflection, should be a moment of reflection. But then again, sometimes, as I said in the beginning, this is a declining empire. And sometimes the people that control the narrative and disseminate information, as Chomsky said, who manufacture consent.
Yep.
Right? Up until the last minute, they will not change their tune.
Yeah.
And then they say, oh, why has the empire collapsed? Because the empire was collapsing right in front of your eyes. You just didn't want to tell the people what was going on.
I mean, the other thing too, regarding the president, the former president of
Harvard,
the thing that we as human beings.
Actually, I'm sorry. Somebody made a comment here that her life was also being threatened.
Yeah, true.
Which I should have mentioned that in fairness. She was getting a lot of calls, a lot of mails,
Middle of the night.
Thank you
go ahead.
Saying that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yes, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because then it changes what I was going to say. And thank you for saying that. Because we as African people need to establish a unit that is going to be able to defend our own. We are seeing the bullying all around. We need to literally, I'm not even playing, I'm not trying to flex, I'm not trying to sound tough. I'm just saying, I'm looking at the odds, I am analyzing the situation, and we are in a very weak position where we just go along and we keep getting punched, and we just instead of standing and punching back. We need to build an organization, a community, a unit that is going to stand up against this. So she's getting threats, we provide security for her. That's what the Black Panther Party did.
Yeah, we need to up our game politically, economically, And once you have solid economics, once you have solid politics, then you can also have solid defense and military. And that goes back to something we've analyzed in the past. Our leadership in African countries have not been able to effectively use political power.
Compromised.
And the example is very glaring when we look at what Thomas Sankara was able to do with political power in just 4 years that he was in power. We have had these countries that have been so-called independent for 60 years. You can't say because they're still surviving that that is an accomplishment. Oh, no. That is completely unacceptable. They've not used political power adequately, effectively. Look at tiny Cuba. Cuba, with all the challenges it has and problems, has used political power tremendously effectively. Meaning you can have a group of people sitting down and discussing strategy using their minds. Cuba is not a nuclear state, right? But they use their mind and say, let's prioritize this, this, and this. Let's organize our society this way, this way, this way, this way. That is why during Ebola crisis, it's Cuba that is coming to the rescue African country. During COVID, it's Cuba that is coming to the rescue to African countries. A country with what, 15 million people? You have a continent with 1.3 billion people. When it came to the liberation of Southern Africa and South Africa, it is Cuba that sent soldiers, losing as many as 30 to 40,000 to secure Angola's independence, to liberate Namibia, to get Nelson Mandela liberated. In fact, some people say they should have marched all the way into Pretoria. You know, maybe they would no longer be discussing land reform in South Africa because that would have been accomplished very quickly. But the point is the use of political power. We cannot just say, oh, yes, of course, the West is doing what the West needs to do. So we can't be blaming the CIA, the World Bank, and the IMF. We should, but it does not mean that is the only thing we should be doing. Because if we had people who are using political power effectively, then the CIA would not be that important in its impact in Africa. The World Bank would not be that important. IMF should not be that important, you know. So with me, I take a two-pronged strategy. Be very critical of the external sources, but the external sources are just fulfilling their interests. That's what they should be doing. What about us? What should we be doing? We should be changing the political structure and emulating more of Thomas Sankara, not Mobutu, not Museveni, not Ruto, you know, and that's what we should keep emphasizing.
And it's because of the actions of the said leaders. That's why you had the CIA, the MI6 in Africa, because they knew these leaders, the leaders who fought for independence, were not going to play according to their game. So once that was certain, they had to come in and, you know, do their machinations. So it's incumbent on us to point out the fact that they're there to do a work, but at the same time, they're very present undermines whatever work that can be done on the ground. I mean, Susan Williams' books, White Malice, you know, chronicles how systemic the penetration is, to the point where even the guys who are giving you your news are compromised. The guys writing your books are compromised.
The waitress and the waiter.
So it's not just your leaders. It's not just your leaders. Every level. So it's not just your leaders. So if it is that ingrained, then, you know, there's so much a human being can do, you know. But the key thing is, as long as you have conversations like this, you create the forum to be able to understand, just like Brother Milton said earlier, using the power of the mind. Ngugi wa Thiong'o in his book, Decolonizing the Mind, said, once you capture your mind, that's the best weapon you can have.
Absolutely.
You know,
and as Brother Steve Biko also said,
consciousness.
The same thing that Ngugi was saying in a different way, that the most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind. of the oppressed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So which brings us to the case itself, the fabric, the 84-page indictment. Have you seen such a beautiful body of legal work before? Because I watched it and there was two things that stood out to me. The lawyer, not just a South African lawyer, but importantly, the Irish lawyer. I've seen that face before. I'm like, I've seen this face before. Where did I see that face? Where did I? So I went to Google it. She was part of the Good Friday inquiry and for Bloody Day Massacre inquiry. For those who are not aware, the Britain at some point, sent in troops in the 70s into Northern Ireland. And they were doing, okay, fine, they weren't dropping bombs, but, they were, killing people at random, that kind of thing.
Indiscriminately killing Irish people?
Yeah, supporting the Unionists against the Republicans and what have you. And so that case was brought, and she was the one on that party. So when I saw her, I was like, fantastic, because she did a similar type work of what she did there, which is, it's not so much as just saying, I charge you with this, but it's putting the smoking gun right in front of you, and then let you sit with your conscience and say, no, I don't quite see the smoking gun.
Okay.
Which Germany did. Germany straight up said, what is this? This looks like a hot cup of tea.
Yeah. But the other point that I really like is the fact that you have this whole thing being led by Africans.
Mm-hmm.
These so-called primitive savages,
Exactly.
So I love that. That to me is a very just and rewarding irony, right? To this false global narrative of African incapacity, African lack of creativity, lack of initiative, right? And which, of course, raises the questions, why do we have this impression when global media can give us a more holistic and wholesome perception and picture, yes, of what possibilities exist in Africa. So this is another victory as well, which is worth also mentioning.
Yes.
Yeah. For me, again, Adesoji, I think I mentioned it earlier on when I was talking how proud I was. Just, it's like 1, 2, 3 legal strategy, like genius. They present, first of all, the summary of the complaint that they're bringing forward, right?
Yes.
They present why, and then they present the provisions that they're looking for. And then one by one, they didn't take just one lawyer and have the lawyer present everything. No, they said, we need attention to every detail. So for number 1, we have this lawyer to speak on this. And they present, number 2, we have this lawyer to speak on this, which gave the chance for each lawyer to do enough research to back up what they were doing.
Correct.
Good job of it.
Correct.
It was brilliant. And the fact that they used videos also, and the one thing they did too at the beginning is admit that we're not supporting the killing of Israelis, right? They start by that. Like, let's just set a disclaimer. Us coming here is not supporting the killing of Israelis. But given what has transpired, we cannot be quiet and not call you out. And we're not going to be scared of you calling us anti-Semitic for doing it. We're doing it anyway. And guess what? We'll show you exactly why we are doing it. It was brilliant.
Right. Absolutely. And Israel really does not have much of defense. So Israel is basically saying, you have to prove intent. Regardless that, yes, our action, which we consider self-defense, has resulted in so many deaths, including of civilians, including of children, including women. Genocide is a high bar. It's amazing. When your defense is not that it's true, We may have killed 25 to 30,000 people.
It doesn't really matter.
But technically, it's not really genocide.
Genocide.
Wow. Yes, that is where we have reached today. Technically, it's not genocide. So therefore, we should not be guilty of genocide. Yeah, we might be guilty of, massacres, but technically, it's not genocide. That is the defense, really. That actually, ironically, is the strongest defense.
Can you imagine, right? If we were still today, like, this is me now flipping this on everyone's table. If Germany decided today, let's say Israel wins this, right? And Germany decides today, given the precedent that has been set by this court, we are no longer paying you all for the genocide that you claimed happened in Germany. Because it's the same thing. And you yourself has claimed that it's not genocide. Said, guess what? You're not getting checks anymore. That would be like blessings from Kamaland.
They'll say that is not the same case. You have to file your own unique case.
I would love to be the lawyer on that.
And they will file it. And this time, Germany will lose that case as well.
Exactly.
But what I'm pointing out is that...
No, we understand your point.
Yeah,
and
what I'm pointing out...
pushing it even further.
Yeah, the hypocrisy of the position.
Right?
Yeah.
You are going to charge Germany for genocide, and then you are going to turn around, carry it out on other people, and then claim it's not genocide. Like, I just want to go around slapping all these imperialists and just putting them in a... I'm sorry, brothers, I'm going to have to take it there, in a diaper and sitting them in a corner.
No, but this is what we said. This case has opened so many conversations, exposed so many hypocrisies, And
but this I'm going to...
That is why it's not widely broadcast, by the way, by U.S. media, not surprisingly, right? Yeah. This is something that should have been shown live on CNN, right?
The argument, because apparently I've watched both sides of the story, right? And the argument that will be put forward is that Israel has the right to defend itself, right? And this is where the ICJ loses its jurisdiction, when a country says we were defending ourselves. But when you go back to Netanyahu's statement that he hopes for a war that would provide an excuse for the final removal of all Palestinians from the land of Israel, what is to say that Netanyahu, which is stuff that is being said out there, I'm not even going to call it rumors, that is some smoke that we are seeing rising here and there. What is to say that Netanyahu did not create the conditions that resulted and made his hope come true, fulfilled his hope? What is to say that he did not sit down and design and manufacture...
Who built up Hamas in the first place?
Conditions, exactly.
Who built up Hamas? It was Netanyahu who built up Hamas, supported Hamas, made sure they were financed, to become the dominant factor, because then he could sit back and say, how can we negotiate?
Let's play the long game, right? This dude has come up and said, this is my hope.
Yeah, because he never supported a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
So let's create this entity that the whole world will look at and say, oh, no way can this be your bargaining partner. Yeah. So, of course, that has backfired. The same way the U.S. empowered Osama when Osama bin Laden was still fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan.
Yep.
And they were successful, getting millions of dollars from the CIA in ousting the then socialist government that was backed by the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And then, of course, Osama had his own agenda beyond that, right? So that is a very similar comparison to how Netanyahu empowered Hamas. So, and then in terms of legitimate defense still falls within boundaries of international law. So we're not just talking the genocide charge, but even self-defense, you have to do it legally. There's the laws that have been set up for that. And in that, they've been violating that as well. That's something that everybody was saying weeks before South Africa even filed the lawsuit,
Someone said something in the chat that is very true. according to racism, genocide is against human beings, and that has been proven in history, and it goes back to our conversation on Namibia, right? Why Germany is refusing to call that a genocide. Right. And the only time genocide is being used, this person is saying, the only human beings, well, first of all, genocide is against human beings. The only human beings are white. Like, right. The Palestinians are not white. There cannot be a genocide.
Absolutely.
So I think you were saying something with Brother Milton. You were saying something with regards to the rise of Hamas in Gaza. It was supposed to be the breaking of the of the hold of the Palestinian Liberation Organization on all the Palestinian issue. So as a result, it was funded by it was a charity. Pre-2003 was basically a charity. 2006, they were implored. In fact, in spite of the fact that they have it clearly within their charter that they were anti the state of Israel, but they were implored by not just the Israelis, but also by the Americans that they enter into the elections. They won the elections. Then they said they were pulling out of Gaza. Pulling out, but yet still surrounding and controlling everything that goes through. You know, that kind of thing. So it's important that that statement be made so that people are aware of that,
of the
history, and also the dynamics within the Palestinian liberation movement, because as you see now, the waters have been muddled, so you don't know who is who. You know, so Israel will write the narrative based on what it's choosing to do at any particular point in time. And so
the U.S. narrative, right?
Yeah, the U.S. narrative, that's it. And speaking of narrative, just going to announce to our audience, I'll be leaving Kumbukeni, but Kumbukeni will be in the safe hands of Sister Nduku and Brother Milton, because I want to focus more on writing, and so that is just one of the news. And also to announce that, incidentally, last week would have been our 1-year anniversary, which we started on January 8th, 2023. So that would have, so we've achieved a couple of milestones, 1,000 subscribers, 52 odd episodes. And those episodes form a body of work. There are books in there. There are points of views, opinions that you will not find anywhere else. So I will enjoin you to go back and revisit some of those videos, and so that if nothing, the books alone.
Yes.
You'll be your own political connoisseur. So
without a doubt, we have powerful archives. Obviously, it means that we know you'll go on to continue great work of empowering our people intellectually to better equip them in the struggle. Obviously, we will need to find another intellectual based in the mother of imperialism, so we can keep abusing that person on a regular basis, but we wish you well as you continue contributing to the intellectual and mental liberation of African people all over the world. And when I say African people, I mean it in a broad context, because at the end of the day, all of us are Africans from East and Central Africa. We have to remind people of that. Even the ones that
Caribbean,
we don't share the same melanation or pigmentation with, at the end of the day, all of you are Africans as well. And you can only learn that, by the way, on Kumbukeni.
Kumbukeni. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Yes, Adesoji, all the best to you. Yes, all the best to you. Ali Madi is going to have to skip out in a few minutes. He's going to leave Ali, but we'll continue with the conversation until our time slot at 1:30.
Okay, very good. I sincerely hope that South Africa does not lose this momentum.
Yeah.
take it in many. I when I listen to the foreign minister, I have great confidence. Naledi Pondo, and I'm urging people, go and research this lady.
Mhm.
Listen to her on YouTube. Listen to her speeches. You know, go to even on Twitter. Some people have posted short clips on Twitter as well. It really gives you hope that when you have people that are using their brains correctly, there's so much potential and possibilities for not only South Africa, for Africa collectively. And while its system may be flawed, I think what is critical is that South Africa still has a political term limits, right?
True.
And I
True.
think that is important.
Mm-hmm.
That is important because people know that if this set of team we have right now is so hopeless, incompetent, we can get them out of office by. We don't even have to pick up arms to remove them, right? So that's important. South Africa has that. So they're able to allow people to compete intellectually, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look at the EFF. The EFF keeps growing every year and every election cycle. They're not picking up arms, right? But in parliament, people are able to listen to what they're articulating. It was the EFF that was ahead of the game when it came to the land reform issue. That is why the ANC started talking about
The land.
redistributing land without compensation. Because the EFF is saying their ancestors, their European ancestors, stole it from Africans. So why should we tax Africans to buy the land? No. So that's one of the things I've been saying. And I'm convinced that had it not been the EFF pushing the ANC back toward where it was drifting to the right, we would not even have this kind of lawsuit that we have today. And I say all this is that we have to have a similar political space in all the other African countries so that the best of the best intellectually can also come and present their plans. When we have a case, and I always give this example, and you know it, my own Uganda, where we have had the same person for 38 years, supported by US taxpayer $1 billion every year in financing and weapons and training for his army. That is the neo-colonial regime that we don't need in Africa. So that's my final contribution for today, comrades.
And it's too bad that's your final contribution, because I was going to go back to the questions. Let's just do one.
Sure, let's do a couple. I have at least 2 minutes.
Yeah. So, Karen L., will it also be a victory if even all that comes of this is that the US and its flunkies now have to present openly as the bullies they are and can no longer hide behind democracy?
That is a victory, though, because it also emboldens others on the other side who sometimes, for whatever reason, and you can't blame them because the US propaganda
It's
is
powerful.
very effective.
Yes.
Even some of us here who have access to information still fall for the propaganda. In many countries, including in many African countries, where the counter information does not even exist. Growing up, I was a teenager in Tanzania, born in Uganda, but my teenage years were in Tanzania. I always rooted for Israel because this is a tiny country. How can they stand up to all these, hostile forces surrounding them? That propaganda is very powerful, right? It's only when your consciousness broadens, you start knowing history, you start knowing who is really subsidizing the state. Israel is not really Israel. Israel is actually a part of the United States, you see, in terms of policy, in terms of financing, in terms of military weapons, but you only know that when you're intellectually broadened, you see. So I'm not sure that many of these countries where our people are not being properly educated, still following the, colonial
Model of
curriculum,
education. Yeah.
that they would, have access to that kind of information.
And
So, yeah,
just
go ahead.
just to add to what you're saying, which segues really well to this, is a statement. If you don't understand the system of white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything you think you understand will only confuse you, Professor Neely.
Absolutely.
You're missing the danger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Remember, we had a show a few weeks ago, and I said, we as African people cannot afford not to know history.
Yeah, I think that was in our journalism conversations. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Boom. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We need that. But comrades, beloved, I have to run. I have to go pick up some critical resources. But please wrap up, and aluta continua.
Have a blessed day.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me look for another one. But yes, indeed, reading is part of it. For those of you in the audience who look at Adesoji, myself, and Milton say, oh, they know so much and come here for that. I didn't know much 3 years ago until I started reading and finding out about our story. What has really happened is when I started learning and being with people who also do the reading and being in conversation with them. It just helps you learn much more about your environment. The thing that I've always had is a strength to do critical analysis, but that combined with the reading and studying and learning is essential. I know Adesoji, you're always talking about reading and knowing your history. So.
Well, I am fortunate in the sense that my dad was a journalist, so reading was what we do, what we did rather. So he would read his newspapers at that time, maybe 6, 7. I would sit in front of him with my legs wiggling. He will fold a bigger newspaper. I will hold mine. And, basically just at that time, I was just making out words. And then eventually it came to the issue of you're listening to news. He says something, then you ask, so why is that not the case? Then he breaks it down. Your encyclopedia is there. You go and you watch documentaries, and all of them, that starts forming a mosaic of information, so that anytime anything pierces through the information, it's not supposed to be there. Why is it there? And then obviously in the course of time, people would write books, obviously people were trying to rewrite their own version of what it is. But as long as you're aware that one book does not hold the entire source, it's like, what's it called? Nkrumah's class struggle in Africa. It's part of a series. So if you take just that one book and you look at it and you break it down and you don't look at, what's it called? Conscientism in Africa. You don't look at, what's the other one? There are three written back to back. So those 3, they are supposed to be read together, not just one. Because if you take one, it's like understanding the food is ready, but what went to making the food is missing. So you're getting just a tiny aspect. I mean, there were whole rafts of information out there, but unfortunately, what Kumbukeni is doing here is trying to act like that filter of information going to our people. Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing is you're essentially saying, listen, we're going to look through the lens, our lens, or like Walter Rodney said, it's incumbent on us to stop looking through the lens of the white man. Yes. Because you've got your own lens, so you might as well do your own looking. Yes. And so whatever you come from it, then speak to the next person. Do you see the same thing I see? And if they don't, why not? Then you have a conversation, you come to some sort of understanding. It doesn't have to be acrimonious, because you're looking at various things. And also, in so doing, be willing to compromise that you don't quite have the answers. Because if you stand behind an elephant and another stands in front, both of you are not seeing the elephant. One is seeing the trunk and the other one is seeing the tail. If your vision of the elephant is the trunk and the tail, you'll be there arguing from now till tomorrow. person stands near Afra, looks at both of you arguing. It's like, what are they talking about? And then comes and tells you, oh, you're actually looking at an elephant, but from different angle. That is how information is digested. So do we have any other questions?
There are. I want to say in the in the comments, everyone is saying they're gonna miss your voice. They wish you well. They will miss you. But as you talk about that, I'm also keen to also ask you, as you bid farewell to the community from a perspective of a co-host, that you share some of your tips on reading, since we're talking about studying and learning and going back to the history and getting that. You did give a couple of them, but if you can please share some of them, and then we can go to another statement or question. Please, Adesoji.
So with regards to reading, okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, so I'm reading this at the moment, rereading actually. What's it called? Can you say it?
Ethnic, too bright.
So can you say
there you go. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pape.
Okay. Ilan. So basically, I mean, by the headline alone, you know what it's talking about.
Yeah.
So it's telling you about what happened in 1948, pre-1948. Okay. So if I take this and I run with this, yeah. So what I do first and foremost is I open the what's it called? The introduction. Okay, what strikes me as interesting here? What would I immediately want to know? Okay, the partition and destruction, the UN Resolution 181 and its impact. Okay, what is that about? I immediately go into it, read it.
Yeah.
And then once that is done, okay, who else talks about that? Then I go another one. This one is Robert Fisk, The Great War of Civilization. You see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so those flags are exactly the same thing as what I'm reading here. So this is Ilan Pape is Israeli. The late Robert Fisk is Irish.
Yeah.
But when they look at the same source, they came together with the same thing. So I know immediately I'm onto something. That's anything I say based on these two is corroborated by both of them looking at the same source. And then that's how you know you're looking at something. But to take the first thing that lands in your lap and move with it, it's a recipe for disaster.
And this, you actually taught me this. If you are looking at an issue and you don't have much time to read the whole book, go to the back and they have the glossary, it's called, I think.
Yeah.
They have like a list of the main issues that they've touched on in the book. So for example, you're reading about slavery, you're looking into slavery, or you're looking into Namibia or genocide, and you have Susan Williams' book. You'll go back to the back and you look there to see where she's talked about Namibia, and then go to those pages and specifically read about Namibia. But also in each book, a lot of the books provide the resources, the books that they themselves read to write the books, which you can go to.
Exactly. What you can also do is read the introduction. Read the introduction and then read the conclusion. Read the introduction, read the conclusion. When you read the introduction, it will tell you the premise of writing the book. It will tell you what the critical things to look out for is in the book. In the conclusion, it will tell you how they arrived at a certain position. If you want to understand how they arrived there, then you go into the book and read it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you for that. So let's talk about this one as we close, because I don't know if it was one of the analysis videos on the situation that's going on or what, but BRICS did come up. South Africa has the backing of the other BRICS countries. They are not afraid of sanctions. Do you think that them being a member of BRICS is what is giving them the power, or the kahunas, for lack of a better word, to stand up against Israel today?
No, they've got nothing to lose. Yeah. It's not about what are you going to do to South Africa? Sanction them? Bomb them? You can't.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's just doing what you need to do. There's nothing you can do to South Africa. South Africa is basically, to them, is if they do anything to South Africa, they would highlight what their hypocrisy is. And If you do that, then again, it goes back to what Karen is saying. You just show your hand. You eventually have to out yourself that this is where we stand. And with the system crumbling in the north, the imperialist system crumbling in China, with the rise of China, the last thing you need is more enemies. So there is nothing they can do. And even if he had been, let me see, which is the smallest country on the continent. If it had been Equatorial Guinea that had brought that case, there is nothing the US can do to them. Nothing. Because what they base their power on is acquiesce, that you understand what the game is and you don't rock the boat. If you rock the boat, there's really nothing you can do.
Yeah. Someone else said Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey. Let me see what time it is. We have 5 minutes. Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey warned us. And just as a segue, I didn't want to mention this earlier on, but I'm quickly going to throw it out there. My top that I'm wearing today is done by the Kenyan company Lawi Afrique. It's an organization that helps the needy. It works with the needy. And you'll be seeing more of this African attire provided by Kumbukeni and Jumuiya ya Nguzo Saba. So look out for those announcements when we start providing them. But in the group, you'll see Lawi Afrique, Amos Onyango there. He and his team are the ones doing the great job. And asanteni sana kwa kunivaza vizuri, ndugu Amos. So the Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey warned us to never underestimate the power of propaganda. That has the power to manipulate you mentally and intellectually in your behavior. So, Adesoji, I've said this several times, we need our own propaganda machine. And Kumbukeni and many other channels on YouTube are doing this work. African-owned channels are doing this work. But the power of propaganda and the need for it in the liberation movement, Adesoji.
So, with regards to how do you counter it? To tell the people what is, why it is, where it is, how it is, and what should be done. Those 5 questions in every video, if you answer those 5 questions, that's it. But if you
5 W's,
sorry,
and H is there. Are they called 5 W's of
5 W's and H.
Yeah.
So once you do all of that, your propaganda. What I find on YouTube is majority of people want to be salacious. And once you're salacious, it won't really register. I mean, I can see someone, screaming and shouting for 5 minutes, and then once I'm gone away from them, what's my takeaway? I saw somebody screaming and shouting, and that was it. But then if you put your graphics, your information, you're clear, succinct, you do the research, you put the sources in your description, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. I'm looking. No. So we did the analysis. I don't see here much. And just to reach out to you all again, to support Kumbukeni and the work we do by subscribing or joining our Patreon. Alimadi mentioned this by passing before. We're going to start broadcasting the journalism analysis of the different articles put out there so that we can empower the community with those skills to help you, avoid being dissuaded or being controlled mentally by the propaganda machine of the West, right? So that we can help you see the traps that they set out for you. And when you read, you can read with an African lens or a decolonized lens when you read their articles. That way, that's another way you can counter the propaganda by learning how to look at them. So those will be coming in February. Look out for that announcement as well. But if you can join our Patreon, again, the levels are varying depending on your financial capability. But we could use the support to do the work on our Patreon. And I'll share that. Any last words, Adesoji, as we come back?
Yeah, last words will go to Nelson Mandela, 1997. Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians.
Yeah. And it's a good thing you said that, because I saw a couple of stories saying apparently Israel is sitting with Congo, Rwanda is getting involved to send Palestinians to Africa. That's what that means. If Palestine, That is ridiculous, first of all. Let's just say that's ridiculous. We're not entertaining it. But what affects Palestinians is going to affect Africa. If you do not see it, at least see it in that way. Whereas Israel is telling Palestinians, go back to Egypt. That's Africa. Whether Egyptians want to admit it or not, that's Africa. Where Israel apparently is sitting with Congo. Congo that itself has its own issues. You can imagine my house is burning, and then apparently my neighbor who has abducted someone is saying, I'm kicking you out, go to the burning house. Like, how ridiculous that is. So, but this is the case. If Palestinians are displaced, their home will be found in Africa. No other place is willing to take them now. So it will literally directly affect us. But if nothing else, the humanity of it all, like just moral and human decency, that we should stand by Palestinians and defend them because they are our fellow human beings. Thank you all for joining us. Adesoji, we wish you all the best. Siku njema, asanteni sana. And kwaherini.